Today we're going to be looking at the question, how successful was the journey of the First Crusade? Our learning intention is going to be to judge the success of that journey. Success criteria is to determine how successful each section of the journey was, to explain why each section of the journey was or was not successful, and to evaluate the overall success of the journey. So, firstly, I have got a recap task for you. On the screen you can see that there are a few different sentences which recap what we have done in the past few weeks. I would like you to add in the missing sections. So there are certain words missing. I want you to add them in so it makes sense. Once you've done that, you can press play again on the video and move on. So, before we look at the first full-on crusade, I'm just going to tell you very quickly about something that was called the People's Crusade. So after the Council of Clermont, the Pope Urban II planned a crusade for the 15th of August 1096. So many peasants saw this as an opportunity to escape their lives. There's been a lot of drought and famine and disease going on in the lives of everyday peasants, so people saw this as an opportunity to escape the dangers and the mundaneness of their lives. In total, around 100,000 crusaders turned up to go on this first crusade. Most of them were unskilled, untrained fighters, and there was lots of women and children. So exactly what you want for a journey across Europe into the Middle East and to the Holy Land. It's definitely what you want. On their way to the Holy Land, the Crusaders ended up massacring thousands of Jews in Central Europe on their way through. So they're causing havoc through Europe as they go. As well as that, some crusaders pillaged countrysides near the city of Belgrade, stealing food, and ended up fighting with local soldiers. So before they even go out of Europe, they are murdering Jews and they are getting into fights with local town soldiers. When they reached Constantinople after losing around a quarter of their number, so a lot of the men turned around and went home, a lot died on the way, so there was definitely nowhere near 100,000 by the time they arrived. Alexios I, who you remember was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, was unsure what to do with this unusual army. They're not skilled, poorly trained, they're disorganized, and there's lots of women and children. He sent them across the river in the direction of the Turks. Some historians think he knew that they had no chance at all, but he sent them anyway. After the Crusaders arrived, the Turks unleashed their arrows at the unskilled Crusaders, and they panic, as you would. They're not used to fighting, so they panic. Most of the Crusaders ended up being slaughtered, with women, children, and those who surrendered being spared. So the first unofficial crusade ended in an absolute disaster, as you can see there. So, now we're going to look at the official First Crusade, which happened in 1096. As we go through the story, what you're going to do for each part of the journey is, number 1, write the subtitle as the name of the part of the journey. 2, give it a score out of 10 for how successful that section of journey you think was. So 1 being not successful, 10 being very successful. And then 3, explain why you decided on that score. So why you think it was or wasn't a successful part of the journey. After I've told you the first part of the story, I will show you what that will look like as an example. So, the first part is to Constantinople. So you can see on the map there, the start of the line is where these Crusaders are coming from in Europe, and then you can see Constantinople in the southeast corner. So many nobles had been inspired to fight for God, as well as to claim land and glory for themselves. So Pope Urban had done a good job persuading Christians to go on crusade. This journey was led by nobles including Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Tarentum. These nobles, amongst others, took thousands of soldiers each on the journey. When they reached Constantinople, Emperor Alexios made them each swear an oath to him and promised to hand over any land they recovered. All of them agreed to swear the oath except Raymond of Toulouse. So that's the first part of the journey. Now what you're going to do is you're going to decide how successful you think it was. So here's my example of how to lay it out. So I've put the subtitle to Constantinople. I've given it a success rating 7 out of 10. And then underneath I've explained this. So I've gave this section of the journey a success rating of 7 out of 10. This is because the nobles have arrived in Constantinople safely, although some have agreed to give up any land they recover because of that oath that they took. So that's all you need to do, is the subtitle, a rating out of 10, and then a short explanation. And you'll do that for each part of the journey. So pause the video here, you do yours, and then press play when you're ready to move on to the next part. So part 2 is through Anatolia. So Anatolia is modern day Turkey, so it's the region just after Constantinople there, going into the Middle East. So during the journey through Anatolia, the nobles were attacked repeatedly by Seljuk soldiers. It took strength and courage to keep pushing forward towards the Holy Land. Many soldiers and horses died, while some crusaders abandoned the trip and turned back. Supplies began to run low, and many wondered if they would make it at all. However, day by day, they were getting closer and closer to their goal of Jerusalem. So, here's how to set it out. You can put your subtitle through Anatolia, add your success rating out of 10, and your short explanation. Pause the video here and press play when you're ready to move on. Part 3 of the journey is the Siege of Antioch. So, by October 1097, the Crusaders reached the city of Antioch. You should be able to see that on the map there on the right hand side. The arrows show you the journey of the Crusaders, and Antioch is there, not quite the last bit, but just above it. It was here the first major battle of the Crusades took place. The city was very important as it was high on a hill, and so could easily control nearby land. If the Crusaders wanted to reach the Holy Land, they needed to take Antioch first. So if they were going to get to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, they had to take this city first. The siege was led by Raymond of Toulouse and his knights. They surrounded the city for almost 10 months, but over winter food began to run out, and many Crusaders and their horses began to starve. So starving to death with the lack of food. So, again, subtitle, how successful do you think it was out of 10? And then a quick explanation. Pause the video, and then press play when you're ready to move on to the next one. Part 4 is in Antioch. So the siege was finally broken when Bohemond bribed a tower guard to let some men inside the city. So he's bribing them to let a few men in. At night, they crept up the tower and opened up the gates. Thousands of soldiers then flooded in the city and began slaughtering the people. So soldiers, inhabitants, villagers, everybody being slaughtered. Many of the inhabitants fled inside the citadel. Citadel sort of like a big fortress, which was very well protected. In the meantime, though, a Seljuk army arrived and surrounded the city, trapping the Crusaders inside. The Crusaders were now outnumbered, and many were sure that all hope of victory was lost because they couldn't see an escape away from the city which was surrounded. So again, subtitle in Antioch, decide how successful you think it was out of 10, and then explain why you've given it that score. Pause the video and then press play when you're ready to move on to the last section of the story. So, this part is called the Holy Lands. It was then, according to sources, a crusader had a vision that led them to the Holy Lance. This was apparently the lance that was used against Jesus during the crucifixion. So as he was on the cross, he was being prodded by a Roman soldier with a lance, and some people think that this holy lance was found in Antioch. Discovering this holy relic convinced them that God was on their side, which inspired the Crusaders to continue their fight. Even though they were outnumbered, the Crusaders defeated the Seljuk army and captured the citadel. Antioch was now under the control of the Christians, and the Crusaders began planning their march to Jerusalem. So, that is the last section of story. Add in your success rating, and then give me your explanation why you gave it that rating. Press play, and once you're ready to move on, press pause, sorry, then press play when you're ready to move on to the last section of today's lesson. So, your final task today. Number 1. Using your success ratings that you decided on. Plot a graph to show the success of the journey of the First Crusade. You can either do this by editing mine, which is on the next slide, which I'll show you in a second, or you can draw it by hand. 2. How different does your graph look compared to mine? So compare your results to my results. Did you agree with my decision or not? Explain why you did or why you didn't. 3. Evaluate whether you think the overall journey was a success or a failure for the Crusaders, making sure you explain why you think it was or wasn't. So overall, was that journey a success or a failure, and explain why. If you're looking for a particular challenge with that one, you could show both sides of the argument and then sum up with your overall opinion. Lastly, as an extension, predict why you think the People's Crusade was less successful than the First Crusade. So I told you the story at the start about the People's Crusade. Why do you think that one failed miserably compared to the First Crusade? Explain your reasoning. So lastly, within your assignment you have got my PowerPoint, which is editable. This is my graph, which shows you the different results that I gave. All you need to do is right click on this graph on the PowerPoint in the assignment, so not on this video, and select edit data. This will bring up a little spreadsheet. Now one of the columns says column 1. You just need to change that column to your name. And then underneath there you can write in the number of the score you would have given each event next to mine. This will then put your line onto the graph alongside mine, so you can be able to compare it really easily. Obviously, if you want to do your own by hand or a different way, then you're welcome to, but this is a nice straightforward way of adding it to the one that I've already created. That is your work for today. Make sure you submit it all through Teams as usual, and thank you for watching.